Good afternoon, Migrant Leaders mentors. Thank you for joining us for this part 2 of our annual safeguarding briefing for Migrant Leaders mentors. We're really pleased that you have joined us because safeguarding and supporting you in adhering to our policies and procedures is very important to migrant leaders and protecting our mentees as well as our mentors. I'm really pleased to reintroduce you to Cate Meredith, who is a senior consultant with the NSPCC, who we've partnered with a couple of years ago in order to formalize our safeguarding training for our migrant leaders mentors. I should like to also say thank you to Cate for working with us over the past couple of years on delivering this annual training for our mentors, safeguarding training, and to congratulate Cate on her upcoming retirement. We're sad to see that we will not be working directly with Cate in the future, but that we will keep in touch with Cate on a personal note, and that we will be continuing our annual training, safeguarding training for our migrant leaders mentors in our partnership with the NSPCC. So Cate, congratulations and thank you very much. And I shall hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Alham, and thank you for that very kind introduction. And yes, I am looking forward very much to retiring, but equally I shall miss so much about what I do at work, and this is one of the things that I really love doing, and it's been such a great pleasure to work with you and to get to know about the amazing work that you're doing. So thank you so much. So yes, welcome everybody. If I could echo what Alham has said about your presence here today, very much valued and appreciate the time that you're taking out to think about safeguarding in your role as mentors. This is our second and final session. We had our last session on the 11th of January, and this is a follow-up to that session. So I imagine that that many of you, perhaps most of you, will have been to that session earlier in the month. If you weren't able to get to that session, then hopefully at least you've had the opportunity to listen to the recording of that session, so that you're in a position to pick up where we left off last time. So I think what I'm going to do now is to start to share my screen so that we can begin to work through the session that we have today. It is hopefully a more interactive session than we had last time. The first session is always drier than the second one, so hopefully there'll be plenty of opportunities for you to engage with the material and to share your thoughts and feelings and ideas about the matters that we're discussing. So I shall now endeavour to share my screen so that we can get on with that. So yes, so as I said, this is the second of our 2 sessions, and we're looking at an introduction to safeguarding for the 16 to 25 age group, which is the age group that you as mentors are working with. So some brief preliminaries really. Today we're focusing very much on your safeguarding responsibilities as a mentor. Last time we were looking very much at the context of safeguarding and about how you can keep yourselves safe as mentors and some of those kinds of issues. But today we're very much looking at your responsibilities and what you would be doing if you became aware of a safeguarding concern. So just very briefly, this is very much the same as we were saying last time, so I'm not going to dwell on it really. If you feel able to have your camera on, then that would be lovely to be able to see people's faces. We realise that you know many of you are working from home, so do step away from the screen if you need to. It's perhaps been a very long day for you, so do take a break if you need to. We will be building a break into the session. But in addition to that, if you need just a few minutes to be away from the screen, then please feel free to do that. We will be interacting with you in various different ways, including using Menti like we did last time, and including the use of breakout rooms as well. But equally, it would be really lovely if you are able to use the chat function to share any thoughts that you have. And at certain points, we'd also really be wanting to invite you to share your thoughts verbally with us too, and raise your hands and things as well. So, and as I say, in the later part of the session, when we are using breakout rooms, we would be wanting you to, if possible, nominate a spokesperson in your breakout room so that there isn't an awkward silence when we're asking you to give some feedback. So if you're able to, a brave person come forward and volunteer to be the spokesperson for your group, that would be really good. We won't be asking for extensive feedback about anything, but just probably 1 or 2 points that, if we get the time, we would love to hear about the discussion that you've been having in your group. Yes, taking care of yourself. So we always say this in safeguarding sessions that we run. It's easy to forget sometimes that that safeguarding issues and talking about issues of abuse can be triggering for us, even when we're not expecting it, even if we're very experienced in working with safeguarding things. So, you know, that can happen very, very easily, really. So if you find yourself becoming personally affected or worried about any of the issues that we're talking about, then there are some places where you can get in touch, particularly if you're worried about a child or a young person. If it's a more personal issue for you, then obviously do make sure that you have the opportunity to speak to somebody. I won't be rushing off at the end of the session, or also you have access to the program team that I know are very, very supportive, or there may be someone else who you can speak to at home or somewhere else, really. So do make sure that if you're left with these feelings at the end of the session, that you do take the opportunity to I suppose just let go of them a little bit and process them a little bit with someone who you trust and would like to speak to. Our learning agreement, again, the same as last time. Very standard learning agreement that we use. I'm not going to run through it, but just leave it there for you to look at quickly. The only one that I always highlight is the one about respecting confidentiality. Obviously, this is a confidential space that we are working with here. We are recording it, but we're recording it for other mentors to listen to, not for going out on the airwaves or anything like that. So we can remember that when we speak. If there are issues of risk that are raised, if we become concerned that somebody is at risk of harm or abuse, either someone that you're working with or one of you yourselves, then we would need to have a discussion with you about how we can deal with that and how we can support you in making sure that that's taken forward. So any comments from anybody about that learning agreement? Are you happy to be working with that? Okay. A brief note about equality, diversity and inclusion. Within the NSPCC, as we said last time, we try really hard to ensure that all our activities are inclusive and accessible to everyone who uses them. And we hope that that is your experience this afternoon. If it isn't, if there's something that you think we could do better in terms of how we run the session, the materials that we use, anything like that, it would be wonderful to hear from you, because we recognize that it's a learning process for us, and you know, we approach it with an attitude of humility and wanting to do it better always. So please let us know if you think that there are things that we need to address around our approach to inclusivity and equality and diversity. So the overall aim of these 2 sessions has been to introduce you as mentors to your safeguarding responsibilities, and really to help you feel comfortable and competent and confident in that aspect of your role, that really important aspect, which probably you won't need to use very much in its very refined form around working with young people who we identify as being at risk. But as we said last time, in a way, everything that you're doing as mentors is about safeguarding young people. It's about helping them to fulfill their potential. It's about helping them to be the best versions of themselves that they can be, and giving them opportunities. So all of that comes within the umbrella of safeguarding, but the very specific activities around fulfilling our responsibilities to those young people who we identify as being possibly at risk of abuse, that is something that understandably a lot of us feel unsure about. We worry about whether we can get it right or not, and this hopefully will help you to feel more comfortable and confident about that whole area. Objectives, very briefly, we've done a lot of these objectives already, so today we're concentrating on the second half of that screen there. So we're looking at how you might recognise a possible safeguarding concern in your mentoring role, and the steps that you need to take in order to respond to those concerns, which will include your responsibility to record your concerns. And running through both of these sessions, we've been thinking about professional boundaries, complying with migrant leaders, mentoring guide and policies and code of conduct. So that is a kind of a golden thread that's running through both of these sessions, really. And then at the end, we're going to make sure that you know about some of the resources and sources of support that are available to you. So that's probably most of the kind of preliminary things, really. That's a little program, draft program. I'm not always rigid about exactly keeping to that to the minute, and if we try not to run over, but sometimes we do run over by a little bit, maybe about 10 minutes. So but we do try not to. If you can make sure that you have with you a smartphone, if you have a smartphone, because we're in a moment going to be using Menti, and also some paper and a pen or a pencil to make some notes, because there'll be some exercises where you're going to need those as well. And finally, I'm hoping that you have received your course books. We don't need the course books until the last part of the session. So if you haven't had your course book, then please let us know so that we can try and rectify that before we get to that stage. So this stage, really, I'm going to hand over to Forgia, who's going to help us explore our own feelings and experiences of dealing with safeguarding concerns. So Forgia, over to you.
Hello everybody. What I'm going to do is share my screen and pull up the Menti details that I'd like you to help us with. So hopefully you can see those on the screen. Cate, can you see the outcome?
Yes, I can. Yeah. Do you want me to comment on the outcome, Forgia, or shall I just shut up and let you do this?
Well, if you would like to comment, that's great. Go ahead. We're simply asking if anybody has ever dealt with a safeguarding concern through work or volunteering, and we've got quite a quick response there. So maybe we leave it for a couple more seconds in case anybody else wants to respond, but it looks like the majority of people haven't. Yeah, and that number's just going up. So I think we can say that most people haven't had to deal with a safeguarding concern, which is good. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. There were 2 people that answered yes. If you could type in a word or short phrase to describe your experience. There is a so family dynamics and domestic violence at home. Cate, is there anything that you'd like to say on that one?
Yes, I mean it's although it's good that not many people have had to deal with a safeguarding concern, it's really valuable to have people in the group who have had to do that, because as we go through the material this afternoon, it might be that experience will enable you to offer additional thoughts and wisdom to other members of the group about what helped you to do that, and what was important to you in being able to in being able to respond to that experience. And yeah, but we do appreciate that it can be a very difficult thing to do, and that it can leave people with residual feelings that are not always comfortable. So it's really helpful to know, and thank you for sharing the fact that you have done that in the past. We don't know whether that was in your role as mentors, or whether that perhaps is in a different role that you currently have now, or perhaps have had in the past. So yeah, so thank you very much for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm going to move on to the next question. And this one is, if your experience was positive, can you tell us why? And again, there's a timer on this one. So that's really helpful and kind of validating for us to have clear safeguarding policies and the ability to consult somebody, because we feel very much that our safeguarding policies are there to support you. And if you ever feel the need to speak to us within Migrant Leaders, then we can easily, we're easy to get in touch with. And Cate, I would say that it's great to be able to feel that you can confide in somebody or some bodies when there are issues like this that you're handling, whether that's at work or outside of work. Would you like to add anything to that?
I think I think they're both very interesting comments, really, and as you say, very validating from Migrant Leaders' point of view. I think the comment about it being positive, and that in that the person or the people who were experiencing the concern felt able to say something to the mentor or to the person who has shared that comment with us now, because I think it can sometimes, if you are on the receiving end of a safeguarding concern, you think, oh no, I've got to deal with this now, and I don't know how to do it, and I haven't got time and all of that. But actually being able to reframe it in the way that has happened here, thinking, oh, that's really that's great that person who is experiencing this issue around domestic abuse, for example, I think that's perhaps what it was here, then it's a very affirming thing if that person feels able to confide in you as a mentor. It isn't something that happens by accident. It's because that person feels that you are someone in whom they can confide, and that is something which is an honor, really, even though it might be uncomfortable as well. It is an honor to be the repository, really, for someone's concerns and someone's worries. So I think if we're able to reframe it in the way that that this has happened here, I think that is a great thing to be able to do. Yeah.
Thanks, Kate. I'll move on to the next question. And this is asking you, if your experience was not a positive one, what would have helped? And I think actually for those people that haven't had the experience, if they can also tell us what they think might help them should they ever have the experience in the future, what would they hope would be available to help them? That would also be useful. This is interesting, isn't it, Kate? So I'm not sure if I've understood that correctly. So it was not positive because they didn't have to make all the decisions on their own, and then actually having guidance on what to do. So perhaps the guidance was missing, or perhaps, with knowing that you don't have to make all the decisions on your own, for me that implies that there was support available, and so that person wasn't dealing with the safeguarding issue on their own. But perhaps we can discuss that later on in the session, in case I've misunderstood those responses. Kate, anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, well, like you, I'm sort of inferring that maybe the person who said that, knowing that they didn't have to make all the decisions on their own, would have been helpful, but they didn't know that when they were in that situation, and so they'd felt potentially a bit isolated, and that they were having to make all the decisions on their own. And if they'd known that that wasn't the case, and that there was support available, that would have really helped. Yeah, and then a little bit similar, really, that guidance on what to do would have been helpful. So that implies to me that actually there wasn't that much guidance available to that person on what to do. So I don't know if I've understood that correctly either. If the two people themselves want to say whether we've understood that properly, that would be great. But obviously, I don't want to push you into doing that if you don't want to.
Well, I
yeah.
would defer to your interpretation of that, given your length of experience over mine. So I think you're probably on the right side of that.
Well, I don't know, but I know that is a very common feeling, that sense of, oh, you know what, I've got to work out all by myself what to do about this, and I don't really know, and I feel it can feel a very lonely place, can't it? If you feel there isn't guidance around, or there isn't anyone to talk to about it, and what we are really wanting to get across, if it's the one single thing that I would really hope that you all take away from today, is that you are absolutely not on your own. If you start feeling that you're on your own with dealing with some of this, then please do not. Please speak to the programme team, speak to the NSPCC helpline, which is like a real person on the end of a phone that you can speak to. And there is a person with lots of safeguarding experience who will just listen and talk you through things. And you can ring on an anonymous basis. And likewise with Migrant Leaders, if you ring up and speak to Forgia or speak to Alam, they're there to listen and to work out with you together about the best thing to do. So please don't feel as though you're on your own, because you are never on your own with this. Yeah. Okay. Forgia, shall I move on with the next thing?
Please do. I was just going to echo what you said, actually, in terms of not to feel isolated. And I have to say, in terms of knowing that people can confide in you, when, you know, fortunately for us, we've not had to deal with any major safeguarding issues. We've had a couple of inquiries which have come in, and I've been able to spend time on the phone with the mentor, discuss the issue. As it turned out, there weren't major issues, and it was just a case of, you know, should I do this or should I do that? And I was able to share my opinion and give some guidance there. And, you know, being the person that mentors feel that they can contact to discuss any concerns or any doubts that they might have is really gratifying. And, you know, the sense of confidence that I feel that you put in me is good for us to know.
Thank you, Forgia. I'm going to share my screen again now. So at the NSPCC, when we are thinking about our safeguarding response to concerns about individual children or individual adults, we use this age memoir of what we call the 4 R's. And interestingly, these 4 R's also feature in Migrant Leaders policy and procedures. So that's a really nice kind of point of connection. And I wonder whether you might be able to, anybody would like to volunteer as to what the first of these 4 R's might be. If we are in the position where we may be likely to be confronted with safeguarding concerns, what might be the first of the 4 R's that we might be required to do? If anybody would like to put a comment in there. I can't really see the chat from where I am. I don't know if you can look in the chat, Forgia, and see if anyone has offered a comment or a suggestion.
We've had one comment.
Go ahead, Forgia, sorry.
Yeah, a couple of people actually said report. A couple of people have said recognise.
Yeah, those are both very good words, and the couple of people who said recognise are the ones that were thinking along the same lines as we were when we were putting this together. But obviously reporting comes into this as well, and it is an R, so that is a really good one. But yes, recognising is the first thing, because you can't report something or respond to something if you're not recognising it in the first place. So that is definitely one of the 4 R's. And then once we've recognised that there is a safeguarding concern, we need to be thinking our next R might be thinking about how we as individuals need to be responding to it. And part of that response, but it has an R all to itself, is about recording. Records are such an important part of fulfilling our safeguarding responsibilities well. So we're going to be talking and doing some work around recording this afternoon. And then the last one, which is very similar to the people who mentioned report, is refer. Yeah, and there's a point of referral that you need to make as mentors, and then obviously if you then refer a concern onto the Forgia or onto someone in the program team, then that then sets up a range of responsibilities that that the program team then has, that Forgia then has as the designated safeguarding lead. So that issue about referring is a sort of has several layers and stages to it, but we're going to be focusing on the stage that will most affect you as a mentor, and the stage which is your responsibility to do. We're not going to worry too much about what Forgia's got to do or what the program team has to do. So let's think then about this question of recognizing abuse or the possibility of abuse when we are in contact with someone who is at risk. So let's have a think about how a safeguarding concern might present itself. And there are, it might be a whole cluster of things that when you start thinking about it, a number of different, there are a number of different ways in which you become concerned about a particular situation or concerned about a particular person. Or there might just be one event, one thing that has happened that has made you think, that really worries me. Yeah, that really worries me. Or that's something I don't really feel okay about. So what we're looking for here is not necessarily examples like a bruise, but we're thinking more about your 5 senses and the media through which you might be on the receiving end of a concern. So one example of that might be something that a child tells you. So a child might make a clear or less clear disclosure to you about something, and you think, that doesn't sound good. That is something I feel uneasy about, or that is something that is definitely making me really worried, and I need to say something about it. So it might be something that a child tells you, but most or a young person or a young adult tells you, but most safeguarding concerns do not come to our attention through things that someone discloses to us directly, or that a child or young person discloses to us directly. So what I suppose we'd like you to think about is the various other ways in which you might become aware of a concern, or in which a concern might just come into your consciousness, really. So again, I don't know if anybody would like to put anything in the chat about how else you might become concerned that someone is at risk of harm or abuse, other than a direct disclosure from a child or young person. Any
so we've got a couple of comments here about changing behaviour or behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really helpful comments. I'm going to put other things up here so that the various bubbles will appear. Yeah, but that is definitely one of them, which will appear in a minute, really. So it could be something a child tells you, it could be something an adult tells you, and in either case, it might not necessarily be that they're telling you this about themselves. They might be telling you this about somebody else, or they might be saying that it's somebody else, and actually it's them. The whole thing about oh, a friend is having difficulties, and you know, what should that person do? Sometimes that might be a friend, or it might actually be them, and it's a way of the person protecting themselves a little bit from that. So it might be
a couple more comments. Sorry, Kate. Demeanour and also appearance.
Yes, absolutely. All those things are absolutely right. It might be a physical sign, so that might be an injury of some kind, or it might be, as that person has said, it might be a change in the person's demeanor, or something like that. But actually, you think, oh, that's so and so doesn't seem themselves today. They seem, they seem quiet, or they seem very troubled about something, or they don't want to talk, or they look a bit miserable about something. Yeah, so a behavioral sign. Yeah, so all these things, really. Obviously, it could be something that happens in in something that you see directly, or more typically, given the way in which you make contact with your mentors, it could be something that that you see online. So online or offline is another important distinction that we can make. It might be the absence of something that you're used to hearing regularly from your mentee, and then suddenly you're not hearing from them. So it might be a thing that doesn't happen rather than a thing that does happen. And very significantly, as someone has said, the issue about a change in behavior, habits, or appearance, yeah, that is a very significant thing. An unexplained change in someone who you've maybe known for a little while, and for no apparent reason, there's something different, and it's a change that concerns you. So they are ways in which things can present themselves. Oh, a feeling. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that one. Yeah, something that actually you're not even quite sure how it is that you've become concerned, but you find yourself feeling worried about that young person and you're not quite sure why. And the important thing is, don't wait until you can you can give chapter and verse or explain and analyze exactly why you're concerned. It's really helpful if you can just maybe get in touch with migrant leaders and say, oh, I just want to talk a little bit about my mentee, because I'm just a bit worried and I don't know if I should be worried or not, but can I just share with you a little bit of what's been happening and see if you think that there's any reason to be concerned. That is a really good way of using the safeguarding policy and the safeguarding procedure. So this is what Migrant Leaders policy says about recognizing the whole thing about recognizing a concern, and it picks up on what we've been saying already, really. So just as you see that the first bit that's in that's highlighted here, just as safeguarding issues themselves are often complex and overlap, and there's a very good example given there of how sometimes drug use and alcohol misuse can overlap with someone being absent from school or college or whatever. The things kind of, I don't know, are interconnected. So also can the methods of presentation, the ways in which concerns can present themselves, can be complex and can overlap with each other. So be prepared for not necessarily a very straightforward presentation, or not necessarily a very straightforward concern. Something, it can be very nuanced, and that's why it's so important to feel that you can talk about it as it arises, rather than waiting for things to clarify, because then you might wait too long and there could be more harm caused. The Migrant Leaders policy also talks about the significance of online activity, which again, as we've said, is so significant to your role as mentors. You use online methods to communicate with your young people. So online activity is a massive growth area, unfortunately, in terms of ways in which young people can be abused, and some of the types of abuse that can be facilitated through online activity, and some examples of that are given here. And I think sometimes that is about a young person being groomed by an adult perpetrator, an older perpetrator, or it might be, and unfortunately in many cases it is in these days, it can be an example of child on child abuse or young person on young person abuse. That we used to call it peer on peer abuse, but recently the terminology has changed and now it's referred to much more as child on child abuse, recognizing that both parties in that can be young people. Or it might be a child who isn't actively being targeted or abused by anybody, but is actually exposed to harmful material that they access online that is harmful to their physical or mental health. And I don't know if you remember the case of Molly Russell, the teenager who had some degree of mental health problems that were very much fueled and made worse by her activity online, in that she was being exposed to suicide websites and that kind of thing. And that can be really very damaging and harmful to a young person. That is not anybody actively abusing a young person, but nonetheless, that person then becomes at risk of harm or abuse. And so it is a safeguarding issue. So just being aware and curious about what kind of things your young people are into online can help you to know how vulnerable they might be in terms of what they're doing in their online world. The other thing to remember is that often signs and indicators are not always present. We've talked a little bit about the barriers that young people face in terms of getting help if they're struggling with things. We talked about that last time. And young people can be very skilled and very adept at hiding the difficult things that they are burdened with in their lives. So there might not be any signs at all that a young person is being abused, and yet they might be being abused. Or there might be there might be signs that might be suggestive of abuse, but equally might be suggestive of something else. So it really isn't a very clear situation at all, and it's worth bearing that in mind, really. So some of that is reflected in this slide here. So when we're thinking about recognizing abuse, we have to recognize that that there are many barriers that young people face in speaking out, and part of that is about things to do with all the different places in which young people might spend their time. This approach that we call contextual safeguarding that we talked about last time. It might not be anything that's happening to the young person within their family. It could be something that's happening to them online, or it could be something that's happening within their peer group, or all different kinds of spaces where they are hanging out, really, as they get more independent. And we know also that some young people might be particularly vulnerable, and that might be because of the circumstances which they are trying to deal with. So asylum seeking young people, for example, can be very vulnerable because they can't call upon the resources and the services and the support that we just take for granted, because our lives are stable. Or it might be because of issues around disability and or communication issues, or it might be, as again we talked about last time, issues to do with past experiences, potentially traumatic experiences that actually erode a young person's resilience to be able to be safe, and makes them more vulnerable to abuse. So these are some of the things that we need to hold in our minds, really, when we're thinking about recognizing abuse. And again, a final point, really, probably on this point, is that no one organisation or person is likely to witness all the signs and indicators of abuse or neglect in a young person. And usually what we might notice, or what we might become aware of, might just be a small piece of the jigsaw. And what that means is it really stresses how important it is to share information. If we have a concern at all, it's so important to share that information, because it's only by putting bits of information together that a fuller picture can emerge. And that can very typically happen around issues of neglect, for example, where one person might see a child or a young person in one situation, and another person might see them in another situation. And as the picture builds up and as information is shared, then there can be a better understanding that builds up about what that young person's lived experience is. Yeah, and the point as well that there's loads of information about possible signs and indicators of abuse. There's quite a lot that are in your course book actually, and also there's some really good stuff in the Migrant Leaders safeguarding policy and procedures as well. So loads and loads of information, but do remember, although it's really important to be aware of them, that very few by themselves are diagnostic of abuse. They might be suggestive of abuse, and the more of them there are, the stronger that suggestion of abuse is. Very few are of themselves diagnostic of abuse. So some common universal signs. I'm not going to go through this in any detail. I think it's repeated in your course book. So yeah, some really common sense things really that might suggest that all is not well with a young person. But as long as we remember that there may be other reasons why a young person is showing those signs. So a mini exercise for you now. This is just for you to do yourselves. We're not going to use breakout rooms for this. And I really only want you to take 2 or 3 minutes over this. So if you can get your paper and pen ready, and maybe pick out one of these, or if you get time, another, maybe two, and think about what might be some signs and indicators that you might expect to see in each of these situations. So I'm going to just leave that with you for a couple of minutes and perhaps see what you come up with. So just pick one that you might particularly want to look at, or maybe one that you want to think more about, and write down how you might be able to tell that that this possibly might be happening for a young person. Okay, so I think you've had about a couple of minutes now, so I'm going to ask you to stop making your notes. So is there anybody who was looking at the first example there? What might be, if you'd like to put in the chat, or maybe would like to put your hand up and tell us what might be some of the signs and indicators that might fit with that situation. So this is a 14-year-old at risk of being sexually exploited. What might you notice if that were happening to a young person? Anybody like to share their thoughts? I can see that there's another note gone in the chat. So
yeah, that's right. It's, somebody's made a comment: withdrawal or change of appearance, dress styles, etc. And I would also just invite mentors to turn their microphones on and contribute if they would like to speak, rather than put something in the chat.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, those are very good suggestions. Yes, there's again, this idea about a change in that young person's behavior or appearance. Yeah. Gifts are a thing that can happen, like a new phone or clothes that are not typical of how the young person might previously have dressed. Yeah, so change in appearance in other ways, maybe a change in the way in the use of makeup or hairstyle or something like that. Obviously, young people might get a new hairstyle for different kinds of reasons, not because they're being sexually exploited, but this is where it's so nuanced, really. Often that one is also about how a young person can be isolated, can be, I suppose, taken away from their friends and their family. How the perpetrator can create a distance between the young person and their sources of support, be that family or friends. And you see the young person, then from their point of view, they're creating a new network of friends that's really perhaps exciting or glamorous, or a new boyfriend or girlfriend or or whatever that they see as being as being a boyfriend or girlfriend relationship, but actually it's not that. Yeah. So yes, there's some of the things that you might notice. What about the second one? Anyone have a go
Could
at the
I
second
share
one?
something on the person at risk of forced marriage, just really from my own experience, not personal experience, but having grown up in a Pakistani community up in Lancashire, and observing some of the behaviours that went on amongst the families of people that I was at school with. Quite often there would be a lot of gift buying for the young woman involved, almost as if preparing a dowry type thing, and a lot of flattery going on to tell that person how special she was and that she was really going to hold up the reputation of the family. This thing of izzat is a very big thing in some communities, and especially the communities that I grew up in. And I actually, unfortunately, observed something when I was doing my degree, where somebody just felt culturally bound and so loyal to her parents that she, although she didn't want to get married to the person that they'd chosen for her, she kind of went along with it, and actually went through a marriage service and then disappeared from you know, that event. In effect, it was a wedding, and just didn't feel able to do anything until that point where it was actually, you know, she'd gone through a legal marriage, and so it had got so much more complicated. She hadn't been able to deal with it. We've got a couple more comments coming in on the chat. So starting to miss school, becoming withdrawn from the education setting, and the family playing a visible role when previously they wouldn't, and others are aware in the community. I think that's similar to what I was saying. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Forgia. Really really helpful and interesting, and just sad really to hear about those experiences that young people were having around forced marriage. And thank you for those comments as well in the chat as well. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do one more because I'm just concerned about the time. So shall we, I think we might go to the last one because that can include elements from the third one anyway. So a 19-year-old in an abusive relationship with a partner. So did anybody get to that one? And if so, would anybody like to share their thoughts about it, either in the chat or by unmuting themselves and sharing them verbally?
I'd like to add something, if that's all right, Cate.
Sure, Helen, please do.
Something that, if I may say, with my own background, I have experienced, coming from an Asian family, an Iranian family, with kind of a rather restrictive and reserved culture. I would say while I was at school until the age of 18, there were things that I wasn't allowed to do, such as have a boyfriend or even have a boy as a friend. So once I went to university, as an 18, 19-year-old, I wasn't the average 18, 19-year-old in the UK. So I didn't have mentors at that age, but if I had a migrant leaders mentor, he or she should be aware of this, that sometimes young people from different cultural backgrounds and different upbringings might be at different levels of maturity and knowledge and awareness of some of the risks there for them when they are on their own, let's say at college or university at the age of 18, 19. So some awareness by mentors would be very helpful in identifying potential risks and abusive relationships that a 19-year-old might be in.
That's really interesting, Alan. Thank you. And I guess I think what you were saying about the fact that the young person themselves, perhaps because of their upbringing and perhaps the level of I suppose involvement that they'd had and protection that they'd had from their family growing up, would not necessarily recognise anything as being a risk quite as quickly as a young person who had been able to or where the norm in that family had been for that young person to have more experience of relationships or whatever before reaching the age of 18. Have I understood that correctly?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. really interesting. Yeah, I think yeah, lots and lots potentially to explore in this, really. I think one of the interesting things to think about is the question about coercive control when we're thinking about an abusive relationship. And coercive control has been an offence in this country since 2015, in fact, and it really often relates to a kind of a sustained pattern of behaviour, or it might just be one event, but very commonly it refers to a sustained pattern of behaviour. There's some very good content on it in if you in the Women's Aid website, if you wanted to have a look at it. But it can include behaviours that can be quite undermining for someone, and the person who's been subjected to it can lose a lot of confidence or belief in themselves, because they are being subjected to a systematic campaign of humiliation, or making them feel stupid, or making them feel ugly, or whatever. And sometimes that can be combined with financial abuse, not the person not having access to any funds, or separating the person from their friendship group or their family, or it can take a sexual form, or a combination of all these things. So that whole thing about an abusive relationship with a partner can be kind of a very difficult web to escape, really. And the more so for, say, a 19-year-old, perhaps a young person, particularly a young person who might not have been brought up in a culture where it has been considered to be the norm to talk about any of these things, and then suddenly perhaps their experience of family life has been a really positive experience, so they can't actually believe that anybody would behave in such an awful way without good reason, and then they're trapped in this situation. So yeah, really interesting to think about specifically about how these examples can relate to young migrants, particularly in the examples that Forzia and Elham have shared with us. So thank you, everybody, for sharing those examples. Is there anything else in the chat there that we need to pick up, Forzia, that anyone has looked at?
There's one last comment about possibly a student coming to the UK on their own, and that is also somebody that's potentially at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. That yeah, I find it almost impossible to imagine what that must feel like. But coming on your own as a young person and not having any friends or anyone to go to, and then anyone who shows you friendship, or who can help you, and you need that help, you're going to gravitate towards that person, aren't you, really? And they know that you're going to. So yeah, that's yeah, a really well made point. So thank you. Okay, so let's have a look at the time. It's coming up to 5 o'clock. I'm wondering if now might be a time for a break. This next section is quite a long section, because we've been doing an exercise. Last year we did an exercise specifically around practicing our recording techniques, which would be quite good to do today if we can. But I think maybe it might be a good time for a break. Do you think, Forzia? Elham?
I think we could take a 5-minute comfort break. Would that be okay?
Yeah, let's have 5 minutes now. So just get up and get a cup of tea, or whatever you need to do. Shake around a bit, and it is now
10 past.
okay, so I make it 10 past now. So hopefully most people have been able to rejoin us. I know that one or two people have had to leave us because of picking up children or meetings and everything. So thank you to all of you who have made it back. We've talked quite a lot about recognizing a concern, how concern might present itself. So the next of the 4 R's is about responding. That whole issue about what we do once as a mentor we have become concerned. And if we think first of all about a direct response to a young person who is disclosing abuse, and as we said, it's not the most typical way by any means in which you might start to become concerned about a young person, but nonetheless it does happen. And in your role as mentors, it's probably more likely that you will receive a concern in this way than it will be for many other of us who are working in a different way with the young people. So there's some really, really helpful guidance that is in your Migrant Leaders policy and procedure that starts to offer you suggestions about what is good practice, what is a helpful way to respond when you are when you have a young person speaking to you and disclosing abuse, and what are perhaps the things that you should try to avoid. And I'm just going to leave that screen there just for a minute, really, for you to have a look and just see if there's any of it that surprises you or anything that you might add to either of those lists. So if you've got any thoughts about what you might add or what might surprise or what surprises you, then again, feel free to unmute and share that verbally, or else pop it in the chat box. I'll just give you a few more seconds to have a look at it. Are there any of those points that anyone would want to highlight? Forge or Ellen, is there anything that you will particularly like to highlight from the point of view of migrant leaders and from the point of view of mentors?
I think for me, a key one that I would highlight is not to promise that you won't tell anyone, because depending on the nature of the concern, you can't promise that.
Yeah, absolutely vital, really. And at the very least, you're going to need to share it with the program team. You're going to need to share it with Forgia or Ellen. Whether it then goes beyond migrant leaders is another question, but at the very least, you need to speak to somebody about it. So a really important thing, and really hard when a young person is saying, "Oh, please don't say anything. Please don't tell anybody. I know I can trust you not to tell anybody." That kind of thing. So a really important thing. Yeah. Professional boundaries. I mean, one of the things, as we've said, that is a golden thread running through our sessions is about the professional boundaries that you are asked to uphold in your role. And sometimes it can be difficult because things like this, a kind of a direct disclosure like this, can sometimes put you into a position where you can end up making promises that you really can't keep, or getting into a situation that actually is infringing your professional boundaries as well. Maybe meeting with a young person to talk about it when perhaps it's very clear that your contact with a young person should be online contact, things like that, really. So just be aware of some of those things. And I think one of the things that's really important is just that listening, just really being as receptive as you can to what the young person is saying. And that can be very hard when the information that you're being given is difficult to hear, and we can put filters in the way, we can put barriers in the way for ourselves, because it just can be very hard and painful to hear some of the things, and really to listen to what the young person is saying. So so just be aware of that as something that can happen very subtly without us necessarily even realize that we're doing it.
Cate, I think.
Yes, sorry,
thank you, Fawzia. There's a comment in the chat box regarding sharing personal experience. And they're asking for clarification whether sharing of personal experience, is that specific to the potential abuse, or can mentors share personal experience when it comes to a professional level and not related to the potential abuse?
That's a really good question. So thank you for whoever asked that question. And I think really what that is specifically referring to is the experiences that you might have had that have been bad experiences or even abusive experiences yourself. And yeah, whether they're the same kind of experiences as the young person or slightly different, really, just be really careful about sharing anything like that and thinking about what the impact might be upon the young person of sharing it. It's not to say that you should never ever share personal experiences at all of any kind, and I think as it might be really helpful to share perhaps experiences, professional experiences, or something that actually is going to help to motivate and really support a young person. But I think we have to be really careful about where that desire to share a personal experience is coming from in our own hearts. Is it really centered on supporting and helping and encouraging the young person, or is it about us just thinking, it just comes out of our mouths before we perhaps even thought about why it is that we're sharing that experience? So yeah, so it's just to be careful about it, really, and think about why it is that you are wanting to do that. And also talking and sharing that experience can sometimes be one of the barriers that we put up in the way of really hearing what the young person is saying. We kind of start talking to fill up the space and the silence. So
just on that, I would also add, if a mentor has a sort of an experience of abuse that's in common with the mentee, with the information the mentee is disclosing to them at that time, there's often a desire to want to demonstrate that it's a common experience by saying, oh yes, that happened to me, or something similar happened to me. And the temptation to do that can be really strong. But I think the important thing is to bear in mind that actually that shifts the focus away from the young person onto you. And at that point, when that young person is possibly disclosing abuse, the focus should be totally on that young person. And to actually share your own experience or similar experience will detract from that person being able to share appropriately with you, and for you to take in the details that you need to take in order for you to do what you need to do.
Thank you, Forja. That's explained it really well. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so a few other do's and don'ts, really. Again, most of them reflected in Migrant Leaders procedure, plus one or two that I've added as well. Yes, something that we said already: don't wait until you're sure, because you might never be sure. You probably won't ever be sure. And it's important to share your uncertainty. It's important to say, I'm thinking that this might be happening and it might not be happening. So don't wait till you're sure. Speak to the program team as soon as you become concerned, really. Do make notes. Yeah, we're going to talk about making notes in a minute. Do make notes as soon as possible, but don't take photos. Yeah, all sorts of issues around taking photos and the use of photographs and what can arise from that it's very much best to avoid. But do make notes of your concern. Don't contact the young person's family members at this stage. There can be reasons why it might be unsafe to contact the young person's family members. And really the decision about contacting family members or not is a decision that needs to be made by the DSL, by the designated safeguarding lead, and not by the individual mentor, and something that you'd need to discuss with the designated safeguarding lead to consider whether that is going to be the right thing to do. And sometimes it's absolutely the right thing to do, and sometimes it might not be the right thing to do because it could place the young person or someone else at greater risk. So don't do that as yourself without having first discussed it with the program team. In an emergency, so an emergency means someone is in urgent need of medical attention there and then, or someone is at imminent risk of significant harm there and then. You know, if they go home, they are at immediate risk of significant harm, or there's an immediate risk of a crime being committed. Those things would class as emergencies. And if you find yourself in that situation, try to speak to the designated safeguard in need, and you'll probably be able to get hold of them. But if you can't and it's an emergency, then get help straight away. Just ring 999, get help straight away, get an ambulance, whatever it is that you need to do. And then you can update the DSL afterwards and talk about next steps after that. Yeah, that is very unlikely to happen, but it could happen. Yeah, it could happen. And importantly, don't put yourself at risk. Yeah. And there's all sorts of ways in which you might do that. I don't know what they might be, saying, okay, I'm going to go around to the person's house now and I'm going to go and sort out that terrible abuser and whatever it is, but there can be all sorts of things that sound less drastic than that could potentially put you at risk. So yeah, so you need to keep safe. And in a situation like that, particularly if it's can feel like a crisis or an emergency, then it can be easy to get into a situation where you're making yourselves vulnerable. So yeah, so just be careful. Okay. Anything else that we need to say about that then, do you think, Borgia, before we start thinking about what happens next? So this is beyond the kind of direct disclosure from a young person. Anything else about what we've said so far that you think we need to say?
No, I think we've covered all the major points. Thanks, Cate.
Okay, so we've talked about response so far as being the direct response to the young person, but there are other parts of your response that we need to cover. So one of the things that we need to cover now is that the whole thing about making a record of your concerns. So here we're moving a little bit into the record, that one of the 4 R's, the recording your concern. And Migrant Leaders has an incident form, which is really helpful because it enables, it reminds you about the information that's going to be needed, and it enables information to be recorded in a consistent way. But if you can't find the incident form, then don't delay making notes. Just make notes on whatever it is that you've got that you can make notes on, and then you can transfer them across. And then as soon as possible, and really within the same day that the concern has been raised or that you have found yourself becoming concerned, you need to report that concern to the DSL. Yeah, so again, there's the use of the word report that someone mentioned really helpfully. Yeah, and the way in which Migrant Leaders would like you to report your concern to the DSL is first of all over the phone. So just pick up the phone and then send your record by secure email. So those are the things that that Migrant Leaders would like you to do. So make a record, phone the DSL, send your record. Yeah, so really simple things, really, really simple. And then you and the designated safeguarding leads can assess the information together. You can talk about it, and you can decide on the next steps. And it will be the DSL that is responsible for making the decision about what needs to happen next. That is not your decision, although obviously your views about it and your insight and your wisdom will be absolutely essential in the process of deciding what the best thing is to do. So that's really what, in short, what your responsibilities are as around safeguarding as a mentor. Anything about those steps, those points there that you think we need to say anything more about, Borgia or Ellen?
The question's just been asked about secure email, and I think that's probably one for me to answer. You can actually, if I remember correctly, attach documents to an email and password protect them first, and then share a password separately. So that's certainly the way I've shared confidential information in the past via email, by password protecting a document, sending that document by email, and then texting the password to the person, so that the password isn't shared in the same format. Does that help, Louise?
Yeah. If anyone's not sure about how to send, if they're in this situation and they're thinking, gosh, I don't know how to make this secure, then talk to Forgia about it when you ring her and say, I need to send you this report, Forgia, and I'm not sure how to do it. And then you can talk it through step by step, really, about how you can do that. Yeah, but I'm sure that that should be something that's not too difficult to do once you've worked out how to do it once. Yeah, let's have a look, see if there's anything else in the chat about anything that anybody's asked. Yeah, okay. Yes, Sneela needs to leave at 5:30. Thank you, Sneela. Yeah, and yeah, Barvin has asked, who is the DSL at Migrant Leaders? Yep, so Forgia's answered that question. So anybody who's not seen that, yep, the DSL is Forgia. She's a fantastic DSL, and yeah, so please speak to her. Yeah, if you have any worries. Okay. Okay, so I think now we've got a little bit of a choice that we need to make with the rest of our time, because I'm aware of what the time is now. It is about 5:25, and we're due to finish at 6. So we've got an exercise that we need to, or that we did last year, related to recording. That takes about 20 minutes to complete this exercise, the different steps of the exercise, and it's an interesting exercise. But we can equally cover the points about recording without doing the exercise. And then we want to spend some time looking at some case scenarios, really, just to give you an opportunity to, I suppose, test out the Migrant Leaders procedure and test out your own understanding of all of that by looking at some examples of when you might want to use the procedure in the policy. I'm happy to be here for a bit later, but I just need to check out with you, and particularly I'm thinking about Forgia and Elham, about whether you would like us to use the recording exercise, or whether you think that given the time we need to move on so that we've got more time on the case scenarios. What do you think?
I think the recording exercise, if I remember from last year, Cate, was all about demonstrating how quickly one forgets the details of what they've been told in a conversation with a mentee. And therefore, it was supposed to motivate mentors when they think there could be a potential safeguarding issue, after they talk to the mentee, to record those things that they heard straight away, and to pass on the issues to the Migrant Leaders team. What do you think, Forgia? Do you think we should do the exercise, or perhaps give back some time to the mentors?
I think that the case studies, the discussion around the case studies, would be helpful. So I would vote to move on to the case studies, if that's okay.
Okay, I think that is a wise decision. And you can always test your own power of recording skills by reading something. The thing that I used last year was a little diary extract, and then people tried to make as accurate a record as they could of the diary extract. And what we discovered is that the detail of things, you can remember the overall sequence of events more or less okay after 10 minutes or so, which was the length of time that we left it. But the details, some of the fine details, really disappear very, very quickly. And often the fine details are what are particularly important, say, particularly if a case is going to end up as a police investigation or anything like that. So this idea about capturing as much information about what you know as possible, as soon as possible after you become concerned, is really important. And I don't know if any of you have any ideas about scientifically how long our working memory is when it's applied to new information. Does anybody want to guess? How long do you think we can, if we're given a piece of new information and it comes out of the blue and there's nothing that we can attach it to that's already in our head, how long would you think would be a reasonable amount of time that we can reliably be counted upon to remember it? Well, the answer is it's not really very long at all. In fact, this source here, this is Goldstein 2010, says that it's around 10 to 15 seconds, which is like nothing, is it? I mean, you know, that's happened like now already. So that's how quickly we start to forget things. That's new information, because that new information in our working memory is temporary and it's not embedded at all. So yeah, so really important to record things quickly. So
and if I can quickly add, Cate, when it comes to this kind of thing, if you ask 100 people, do you think you're above average in terms of your memory or below average? 90 of them might say, oh, I'm above average, which mathematically is not possible. Not really. So, you know, we should really consider ourselves part of the population, and that research and statistics apply to us as well. Consider ourselves average and really take on board the leading practice, policies and procedures that we're trying to advocate in Migrant Leaders.
Thank you, Alham. Yes, really important. Yeah, and sometimes the thing that you're being told sounds so you think, I'm never going to forget that. You know, there's no way that I'm going to forget that. I'll remember it for the rest of my life or whatever. And then you find that you do start forgetting aspects of it. So yeah, so important to remember that, really. Here are some points about creating a good record. The form that Migrant Leaders provides is a really good form, and it can help you to remember things and record the right things. All the stuff that I'm sure you know about already, about keeping a record factual and distinguishing between fact and opinion. That's not to say you shouldn't put in an opinion, particularly if it's the young person's opinion or your opinion. But make sure that that is clear, that that is an opinion and not a fact. And if it's your own opinion, then add the reasons why you hold that opinion. Yeah. And if you don't know something that's asked for on the form, don't guess, just say that you don't know. Yeah. So they're the sort of main things, really. You will get a copy of these slides, so you can make sure that you can remind yourselves of the points if you want to. Yeah. Okay. So this is the exercise that we're not going to do. So I'm going to move on. Okay. So we've now got to the stage where we've got about half an hour, really, just under half an hour, which is really good. And so we're going to move on to the last section of the session today, where we're going to look at some case scenarios that will hopefully help us to put into practice some of the things that we've been talking about today, and think about things in relation to particular examples. So the case scenarios that we're going to use are in your course book. So hopefully everybody's got your course book. So if you turn to page 13, you will see that there is a set of 6 case scenarios. And on the following page, there is a little list of how we would like you to use the case scenarios in your discussion. And we're going to break into, how many people have we got here? We've got 9 people. So I think if we use shall we have two breakout rooms, and then that's easier then for everybody to take part, because I'm aware that some people have not actively made comments or anything so far. So if we break into 2 rooms, and if we make sure that we're back by about 5 to 6 perhaps, that gives us 5 minutes to finish off, and we might overrun by about 5 minutes. So if we make sure that we're back by 5 to 6, that would be really good. But what we'd like you to do is to choose which of these case scenarios you most appeal to you, most interest you as a group, and then what we'd like you to do in terms of processing them and working with them, again, is sort of set out in your course book, but it's also on it's also on this slide here. Just take a moment to connect with your feelings about this case scenario. Imagine that this is a situation that you are faced with as a mentor. This is something that you become aware of as a mentor, and how you think you might feel about it, because it's important to just register that, because as we've said, that can either get in the way of you being able to listen properly, for example, or it can tell you things about the support that you're going to need yourself to deal with the situation. And then think about, how concerned are you, and scale your concern a little bit. And you might not all agree on how concerned you are. So so give a number, come up with a number on a scale of 0 to 5, where 0 is I'm not at all concerned, and 5 is I'm really extremely concerned about this situation. And then think about why it is that you're concerned, or why it is that you're not very concerned. And if you are concerned that this mentee is at risk of harm or abuse, maybe say what type of harm or abuse you think the risk is, and what the signs and indicators are, if any, that that this could be the situation here. And then think about, okay, so if I'm the mentor here, this is how I would respond. And then think about what should happen next. If the situation is that you would speak to Forget as the DSL about it, maybe think about what you perhaps think should happen beyond that. Yeah, that's obviously it won't be your decision what happens beyond that, but you'll have a view about it, and that's a view that it will be really important for Forget to hear as well. Okay, so I'm going to divide you into these two groups now, if I can find a way of doing that. Hold on a moment.
Kate, I've set up the rooms.
Oh,
so I can
brilliant.
start those.
Thank you, Forgia. So we're going to put you into these two rooms now, and good luck, and we'll see you at 5 to 6.
Okay. Kate, so would anybody that was in the first breakout room like to sort of feedback on your discussion?
Sure, I can give a quick overview. So we looked at 3 scenarios: number 1, number 5, and number 6. Number 1, we didn't feel too concerned. We didn't think it was a safeguarding issue. So from a scoring perspective, we gave it a fairly low score, 0 to 1. One of the things we thought about was, if they cannot access their phone, whether they can have a Teams meeting through their computer or a physical meeting to continue the mentoring sessions, if that was possible. But, you know, depending on the background and the culture they're from, it's not surprising if parents take a view that phones interfere with studying and take a bit of a harsh view. So we thought it's not a safeguarding issue, but, you know, are there ways around to try and continue the mentoring?
Yeah. On that one, I would say that do continue to try and have a Zooms or a Teams meeting with the young person, but we don't recommend an in-person meeting, especially for a 16-year-old, simply because we wouldn't necessarily want them, the times that mentors are going to be available for mentoring sessions, we wouldn't want the young people out away from home at that time. So that sort of needs to be thought about a little bit more carefully. Thanks, Bhavin. That's really good. Would you like to talk about the other ones, or if anybody else in your group?
Well, I don't know if Stephen or Louise want to do one of the other ones. Stephen?
Yeah, number 5, all the alarm bells were going. It was 5+ in terms of our concerns, and to reassure them that they've done the right thing in raising it, but then get straight onto yourself for here and say help.
you know, my instant reaction is, oh my goodness, what would we do? Because, you know, I'm not an expert on this sort of thing. But in terms of, yeah, definitely this is the sort of thing that I would hope that you would bring to our attention, because it's an adult. The sexual harassment is, you would approach it differently if it was an under 18-year-old and an over 18-year-old. So there's slightly different approach, I think. With an under 18-year-old, it's really clear cut, and you can, and I would be thinking about this being a legal issue. Now, sexual harassment when it's adults, I think, becomes more of a grey area. Sometimes it's going to be clear cut, and other times it's going to be very difficult to decide. And I would say that if that was brought to my attention, I would be referring it to the police, but also trying to speak to the young person to try and establish facts of what was going on. Cate, is that something that you would concur with, or would you take a different approach? It's on number 5.
Number 5. No, I agree with you, Forja. I think it's we are talking about an adult here, and therefore the question about what that person would like to happen as a result of what they're being subjected to is absolutely central to the whole issue. So I would go along with the fact that actually we really need to be listening to what that person wants, but as against that, we are looking here at someone who is in a position of authority and has obviously potentially has control and influence over what happens to the young people in their care, and so there is also a risk of a crime being committed as well. So I think I would try where possible. I would try and work with. I think it needs to be reported, and I would try and work with the consent of the young person. But ultimately, I think if the young person didn't feel able to give their consent, because there's clearly been coercion about this in the past, and there could be other victims here of this. I do think that I would be struggling to say that ultimately it couldn't be reported to the police. I would think that ultimately it would need to be reported to the police, if possible with the young person's consent, but ultimately without it if necessary.
Yeah. So would somebody in group 2 like to speak about what they were discussing? I know, Michelle, you got left on your own for a certain time.
Ozia, I was with Michelle. There was just 2 of us. Michelle was on a train, so we felt for confidentiality reasons we shouldn't speak.
Sure, absolutely. So anybody else want to comment on the other case studies that you might have looked at?
Did you all I'm sorry that you were in that position, Michelle, and it must have been difficult being on the train, and thank you that you were able to join us for as long as you were. It's good that Helen was able to be with you. Yeah, did the other group then, did you manage to work through a number of the case scenarios? I know you were looking potentially at the first one. I didn't want to mess up your conversation, so I kind of shared screen with you and then sort of moved away. Yeah, so are there others that you wanted to feedback on?
So Cate, we discussed the first one, but we also spoke about the last one, number 6.
Okay.
And again, we thought that this was a big issue. So in terms of scoring, we would give it a 5 and bring this to Forzia's attention.
What was it that made you concerned about that scenario, Bhavin?
It's, getting gifts, phones, clothes, older person as well, suddenly change in how they're acting, behaving, and talking about all-night parties and things for a 16-year-old. That's a bit of an issue. They're quite young for that. So all these different things added up to quite a high concern.
So were you able to name what the concern was? What particular type of abuse you felt that that young person was at risk of there?
We didn't get to that, no.
Okay, yeah, yeah, you got through a lot of stuff in not very long. Yeah, so I mean, I guess it would the main concern that I would have in that situation would be around sexual exploitation. It looks like a fairly classic presentation of a young person who is being groomed into being sexually exploited, really. And this older boyfriend, who she's thinking of as her boyfriend, is someone who is sort of part of a more organized crime network, and is actually trying to groom her into being sexually exploited. So which I think is I imagine that is what you were what your concerns were, really, even if you didn't quite express them as a group in those kinds of ways, and perhaps didn't have the time to say that. Yeah. Okay.
The other issue that I would think would be the county lines thing, Cate. There's a possible risk of children being used as drug mules, that sort of thing, and it's the grooming into dependency and then threatening to withdraw those treats that have been offered in exchange for delivering things, or getting involved in sexual exploitation under threat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes there can be, because these things are both of the things there around county lines and around sexual exploitation, very, very frequently can come together as part of organized crime activities. So so important to be aware of that. So thank you, Forgia. Yeah. Okay, so it is just gone 6 o'clock. So the last thing that we wanted to do was just to I think make you aware of some of the resources that are available to you, making sure that you know what the resources are that are available to you as mentors in your safeguarding role. If you look in your course book, one of the things that we had in our group was people not sure whether they'd received the course book or not. But I think when people managed to dig out their emails, they found that they had received the course book. So I don't think in the end there was anybody that hadn't received it. But if, when you look at your emails, for some reason, I'm not sure why this would have happened, but for some reason you can't find the attachment with the course book on, then obviously I'm sure that Forge will be able to send that to you. But assuming that you can find your course book, then if you look on page 17, there's a whole list there of and page 18 as well, there are a whole list there of different resources that you can access. So they're all resources that are not migrant leader resources. They're resources that come either from the NSPCC, or else they're support organisations or other organisations that might have useful information that you could browse and have a look at and look up. But then in addition to that, they're all the resources that migrant leaders provide you with as well. So I wanted just to offer Forgia and Elham an opportunity just to maybe summarise what those are, so that people are really aware of the full range of things that are available to them in their role as mentors.
I think if you don't remember anything, Migrant Leaders Mentors, remember two things. One, go to the Migrant Leaders website, Digital Zone, where our policies and procedures are, including the mentors guide and code of conduct, our safeguarding policy, incident form. And if in doubt at all, please contact myself or Forgia. If you can't remember anything else, those are the two things to remember: Digital Zone and Elham and Forgia.
Fab. Yeah.
And I'm sure that's all reflected in our mentoring guide and code of conduct as well. So we do ask you to keep that handy, but you can also download that from the website too.
Yeah. It's a really good guide and a really good policy as well, and very usable. So often we see policies that they may be brilliant policies, but they're they're extremely dense and difficult to find your way through. And whereas I think that Migrant Leaders really gets that balance between lots of very useful information and clarity, and yeah, just easy to use. So really, really good. Yeah. So that about wraps it up then for today, which is our second session. So I think that's probably it from me. I'd just like to thank you so much for sticking it out this afternoon, and for being here, and for all the amazing work that you do as mentors, and wish you all the very, very best for the future. And yeah, and have a lovely rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, Cate, for the past couple of years working with us. It's been a real pleasure working with you. And thank you as ever, Migrant Leaders Mentors. We really appreciate your continuing support of our charity.